One final drink, one fatal secret. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Comment your city. I love hearing them. Wolfe's case begins with the Don's last whiskey. If you live long enough in the brownstone on West 35th Street, you develop a delicate ear for the kinds of knocks that belong inside and outside the house. Delivery boys have a rhythm that says they're already moving away. Clients knock like they're paying by the rap. Reporters jab like they're trying to spear a story through the door. And there's a very special knock that means trouble came dressed as respect. That last one sounded at 10:32 a.m. while I was finishing a second cup of coffee and wondering if I could nudge Fritz into making Viennese pancakes again without causing a diplomatic incident. The knock was 3 slow, polite taps, spaced like the metronome of a man who had never hurried a minute in his life. It said, "Please and thank you, and I know you're in there." And it didn't raise its voice. I set the cup down and went to see which brand of civility wanted to come in. On the stoop stood a broad man with a brim that believed in shading not just his eyes, but possibly the entire borough. He wasn't bulky the way the amateurs are. He had the comfortable spread of a retired football guard who still lifts something heavy for the principle of it. Beside him, a woman in a tailored navy suit held a wooden case by the handle as if it weighed more than the man and more than she wanted me to know. "Good morning," I said. "If that's a violin, we don't do requests before noon." The man's mouth took its time forming a reply. "Mr. Goodwin." That's the rumor. He tipped the brim without removing it. Manners, not manners. "I'm Massimo Conte. This is Ms. Avery Bell. We have an appointment with Mr. Wolfe." They didn't. The big guy's voice wasn't asking. It was reciting. I could have said we were booked through spring, but I'd be lying, and I don't lie before lunch unless it's urgent. Also, if you know the law of this house, you know that an unscheduled appearance is 3/4 of the qualification for admission. The other quarter is whether I think they'll make the carpet look better or worse. "Come in," I told them, and stepped aside. The woman with the case gave the threshold the same look a person gives a high bar on a bad day, and crossed it without brushing a speck. Her eyes were the kind that notice the speck and file a memo about it. Fritz looked out from the hall like a stern aunt inspecting a traveling circus. He has a nose that can smell motives with the butter, and whatever aroma our callers brought with them wasn't floral. I told him guests, and he vanished, which is Fritz's way of clearing the air without using a cloth. I led them to the office. Nero Wolfe sat behind his desk with a book, which is not a newsworthy development in any universe. He was a large man in the way that mountains are large, and he had the same opinion of being moved. The light from the south window threw a soft shine across his head and his cheeks, which, set in repose, looked like they were carved by a contented sculptor who didn't mind curves. He didn't rise. He didn't nod. He didn't mist the air with welcome. He laid a thumb in his book to hold his page and gave me a look that asked who and why. "Mr. Massimo Conte," I said, "and Ms. Avery Bell. They have a box heavier than it looks and a confidence to match." Wolfe grunted. He reserves a different grunt for each human feeling. This one meant, "Proceed, but let's not call it hospitality." Ms. Bell approached the red leather chair facing Wolfe, regarded it, and sat with the boxed case balanced on her knees. The big earners tend to sit like they own the place. She sat like the chair had been warned. Conte stayed standing and took the position people take when what they're guarding is technically not their own, but might be soon if anyone reaches for it. "Mr. Wolfe," Ms. Bell said. She didn't waste words, but the ones she kept were polished. "Thank you for seeing us without notice." "I have not seen you," Wolfe said, "without notice." He touched the book closed with 2 fingers and regarded the wooden case. "You have brought something that weighs on your lap and on your mind. It was in my interest to see what you would decide to put down first. I don't always enjoy people who bring the lecture circuit to my office, but in Wolfe's mouth it comes with a vintage bouquet." Ms. Bell absorbed it. "I'm an attorney," she said. personal counsel to Mr. Salvatore Belandi. Conte didn't twitch. That would be spoilers. Wolfe let the name hang for a full breath. You are the belle in the Belandi? She hesitated, and then allowed something that wasn't quite a smile. Granddaughter. Ah, Wolfe arranged the word like a place card. And your companion? Mr. Conte, she said. He handles certain familial logistics. The man shifted his weight just enough to acknowledge he had been acknowledged. I've met more direct telephone poles. Mr. Belandi, Wolfe said, in a tone suggesting the surname was a weather condition, is a man who has conducted a vigorous life. He is dying, Ms. Bell said, and if you think the word sat light on the air, you haven't been in rooms like ours. Within days. Phooey, Wolfe murmured, not at mortality, which has a way of ignoring commentary, but at the way facts insist. And you have brought us his... what? She lifted the case to the desk with no help from Conte. The sound it made when wood met mahogany didn't belong in polite society. She flicked the brass clasps with her thumbs and opened the lid. Inside, nestled in a slotted bed of dark felt, lay a bottle that had known better centuries. It was squat around the belly, green glass, sealed with dark red wax like a cardinal's top knot. Paper browned by honest time clung around its shoulders. The label had once had flourishes. Now it had confidence. Across it, in a hand that came from the era when hands meant it, someone had written 3 words in fountain pen ink. The last whiskey. Even Wolfe tilted his head. He does not drink whiskey. He drinks beer, and he drinks it the way monks say prayers. But food and drink, even the ones he refuses, form one of the few kingdoms he recognizes besides orchids and the English language. Miss Bell waited for exactly as long as it took for 2 men to look at an object and decide they would each rather be the one who speaks first. I resisted. She won. This, she said, is a bottle of pre-prohibition rye, privately distilled in 1920 for my great-grandfather. My grandfather has kept it for 55 years on the top shelf of a cellar no one enters without permission. Conte's eyelids lowered a millimeter, which in his body amounted to expressive. It is the last of the batch, Miss Bell went on. My grandfather calls it his last whiskey. He also calls it his test. You brought an exam, I said, for a man who steadfastly refuses to enroll. She looked at me with polite impatience and turned back to Wolfe. Mr. Belandi asks that you ensure this bottle goes to the correct person after his death. I am not an executor, Wolfe said. I am not an auctioneer, a courier, nor anointing angel. Who is the correct person? That, she said, nestled the word like a paperweight, is the matter. Conte's right hand, which had been a paperweight of its own, flexed and settled. He kept his eyes on the bottle, as if reading the label for a 4th time might teach it manners. Miss Bell continued. My grandfather has 3 candidates. None of them is a relative. Each has a claim he considers legitimate. He isn't asking you to decide as a jurist. He wants you to decide as Mr. Wolfe. Spare me that flattery, Wolfe said, though he didn't sound pained. Who are they? She listed them without peeking at notes. Mr. Franklin Demarest. He runs a private club on West 12th, where my grandfather keeps a locker. He can argue that he has preserved my grandfather's palate and privacy. Ms. Leora Vance. She owns a small distillery upstate and was once my grandfather's apprentice in the art of blending. She can argue that she will treat the whiskey as a legacy, not a trophy. And Father Anselmo Vieri, she said, with a breath that suggested family lore and family swear words had both had their say. He is the priest at San Callisto. He can argue that the whiskey was promised to the church for a charity auction during my grandfather's brief flirtation with philanthropy. You will forgive, Wolfe said, the adjectives brief and flirtation doing so much work. He repented of the pledge the next morning, Ms. Bell said, or claims he did. The father says a promise to the poor cannot be rescinded. Not unique doctrine, Wolfe allowed. Your grandfather wants me to choose a rightful recipient among three who can each clothe themselves in a virtue: charity, craft, and loyalty. He eyed the bottle. The nouns are attractive, the people less certainly. Why me? Miss Bell's gaze did a small lap around the room and returned to Wolfe. Because he says he can't sit at the table with any of them without giving the bottle to the one who stares him down. He wants a mind he respects, with a spine he can't bully. Those were his phrases. He knows your rule about leaving the house. Wolfe's mouth twitched. He's too generous. Conte's hat brim didn't move, but I caught the shimmer of disagreement. He's right, Conte said. Mr. Belandi doesn't need a judge. He needs a refusal that won't bend. You are the courier, Wolfe said at last. You bring us the bottle, the supplicants, and the supplication. And the fee, Miss Bell said. She reached into a side pocket of the case that my eyes had not filed and produced a long envelope. She slid it across the desk. I had seen some fat envelopes and met very few that didn't flatter themselves. This one sagged with dignity. My grandfather apologizes for the vulgarity of paying in advance. He wanted to remove that variable from your calculus. Purr, Wolfe murmured again, but he didn't push the envelope back. He also didn't open it. That would have admitted curiosity, and if you think he leaks that easily, you haven't seen the man watch rain. Allow me a laconic recap, I said, because if a room has too much silence in it, it gets all over the furniture. A dying man with a lively reputation has a bottle he calls his last whiskey. He's picked 3 non-relatives who each have a plausible angle for taking it home. He wants Mr. Wolfe to decide who deserves it, knowing that if he does, he'll pick the wrong one for the right reason. You brought the bottle and the incentive. You want a verdict after he dies, not before, because otherwise he'll change his mind twice and shoot the messenger. Ms. Bell was enough of a lawyer to credit a summary without admitting it was better than the original. We need the verdict before the funeral, she said. At the wake, to be precise. Where? Wolfe asked. San Callisto, Conte said. He had 3 words ready, and he spent them. Basement hall. Wolfe's eyes closed for half a second, the way a cat blinks to demonstrate affection or contempt depending on the dish. And the bottle until then? In your custody, Miss Bell said, if you accept. My grandfather trusts only 2 rooms for the next 3 days, his bedroom and yours. I don't recommend being flattered by a Belandi's trust. It comes wrapped in strings and recorded at odd angles. But I watched Wolfe's face and saw the tiny line that means something had tugged on an old thread in his mind. You could put a lit cherry on a parfait and not get a sweeter tug. You expect, Wolfe said, that there will be importunings. Miss Bell surrendered the faintest of nods. If the bottle is here, we believe this is the safest place in Manhattan. If it is anywhere else, we can't promise we won't be forced to promise. Conte cleared his throat. A gravelly public service announcement. Mr. Demarest has friends in tidy clothes. Miss Vance has friends in trucks. Father Vieri has parishioners who think doors are sinful if they're closed. I can discourage all 3, but I would rather discourage them outside this door than inside it. Wolfe lifted a hand. The gesture was not dramatic. It was punctuation. Mr. Conte, Miss Bell, why me again? For the same reason you are asking, Miss Bell said. Because you already know there is a reason, and you dislike reasons that try to hide. She was good. She wasn't improvising. She was sliding a card she had planned 6 blocks back. Wolfe's nostrils decided to take in a little extra air, which is him applauding. You're not telling me everything, he said. No, Miss Bell agreed. Not yet. He could have sent them away for that. He has sent away men who arrived with more frankness and less wood. But Wolfe's mind, for all its obesity, sits on a high wire and enjoys a wind. He angled a glance at me. Archie, the safe. I got up and went to the wall safe behind the bookcase. There isn't a panel that rotates when you press a candlestick. There is a lock and a sturdy hinge, and a file of papers on men and women who matter for a week. I opened it and looked back. He tilted his head toward the case. I lifted the bottle. It had that old glass weight that makes you believe gravity has favorites. The wax seal was uncracked. The twine knotted in a way that would make a sailor sit up and a forger swear. I slid it into the safe behind a ledger that looks like it contains stamps and contains fewer harmless things. I closed the door and spun the wheel. Hearing that metal tongue slide home does a special thing to a room. It turns time into waiting and people into promises. Wolfe looked not at Miss Bell, but through her. "I will, Miss Bell," he said. "Keep custody of your grandfather's bottle until the time you specify. I will, at his request, adjudicate among his 3 candidates and determine the recipient. My fee, whatever preposterous sum your grandfather has foisted in that envelope, will not purchase silence about matters that endanger this house. If any of your 3 applicants, or any adjunct thereof, attempts to disturb this brownstone or its routines beyond the minimum I choose to endure, my adjudication will be final and unappealable." "That's all we ask," she said, which was both true and not. "Very good. Archie will draft a receipt describing the object and its condition as of this hour and minute." He consulted the office clock. 10:51. "You will sign it. I will not." I went to the desk and pulled a form. "If you think I don't have a template for custody of valuable thing, which may very well become a problem, you haven't seen our filing system. In the V's under vanity and vice." As I clacked the Remington, Miss Bell said, "There is one more detail." "Ah," Wolfe said. "The wake is Thursday," she said, "at 6. My grandfather has asked that the recipient be named then, in front of anyone who wishes to watch." "In public," Wolfe said, tasting the word as if it were a sardine placed on a plate of truffles by mistake. "Why?" "Because he says," Miss Bell answered, and for the first time there was something in her voice besides alloyed calm, "that justice is only worth the trouble if there's a witness." Conte looked at the rug as if apologizing to it. "He also likes a show." "Most men do," Wolfe said, and the corner of his mouth shifted, non-committal. "Very well." I slid the paper across to Miss Bell, and she signed it with the fast, neat signature of a woman whose mother once told her legibility is grace. Conte signed as witness, each letter landing like a boot. I added mine where it belongs. Miss Bell stood. Conte reached for the case, empty now and lighter, and she let it go, last, as if reluctant to admit it didn't weigh what had been inside. "At 2:30 this afternoon," Miss Bell said, as if we had arranged it, "Mr. Demarest will be available for you, Mr. Goodwin, at his club. Miss Vance tomorrow morning at 10 at her distillery. Father Vieri keeps office hours from 4 to 6. He expects you." "Of course he does," I said. "Clergy have a direct line." She ignored me politely. "My grandfather will be grateful," she said to Wolfe. And then, after a beat too brief to be anything but deliberate, "And so will I." They left with the same measured economy they'd arrived with. The door closed, and the house adjusted its breathing. I turned to Wolfe. "Well, we've become a safe deposit box for morality in a bottle. If you want a ribbon, I can see if Fritz will sacrifice something that once tied a veal shank." He closed his eyes and put thumb and finger to the bridge of his nose, a gesture that means either headache or high pleasure. "With Wolfe, those are cousins." "Confound it," he said, not unhappily. "The fee's real," I told him, palming the envelope and weighing it the way a man weighs a trout and a sin. "It thuds. Do we earn it by tasting? Shall I fetch tumblers and a clean conscience?" "You will do nothing so asinine." He opened his eyes. "We are custodians. We shall remain so." "Fine with me," I said. "But if you don't mind a small inquiry from the hired help. You accepted, faster than usual, for a job that doesn't involve a kitchen, an orchard, or avoiding the police. He looked at the safe, and then at me, and then at the space between the two, as if something hung there. I accepted, he said, because what they did not tell me was more conspicuous than what they did. I leaned back in the red chair. Such as, he said, why the bottle needed to leave Mr. Belandi's house today, why the granddaughter who disapproves of family theatre agreed to become stage manager, and why Mr. Conte, who could have placed that case in any vault within an hour, brought it here to provoke a specific set of actions by a specific man he had never met. Because you're pretty, I suggested. Wolfe's eyes flattened. Because, he said, someone means to take that bottle and cannot do it by force in this house. They will need guile. I'm curious whose. Lovely, I said. I'll pencil in guile between lunch and the 12th Street Club. You want Saul? Not yet. He set the book he had been reading aside, as if granting leisure a furlough. First, Fritz will provide us with braised artichokes with garlic and anchovy. Then, you will visit Mr. Demarest and discern why a man who has made a business of discretion wants a public prize. Hard to imagine, I said, getting up. People never want the thing that makes them look good. He grunted again, a softer one. And Archie, he added, as my hand hit the doorknob, when you are at Mr. Demarest's club, do not drink anything offered. I looked back. Because charity begins at home? Because, he said, I would like one of us to retain an unclouded tongue. Your faith in me, I told him, is the sweetest liquor. He waved me away. The safe behind me held a bottle with a century of reasons to be bad news. The house felt bigger and smaller at once. Outside, the city was running its eternal race without checking who had the baton. Inside, the rules had been disturbed by a wooden case and a label written in a dead man's ink. If it was just booze, we would have locked it up and gone on with our day. But nothing that comes through that door is ever just the thing it is. That's the curse of the job and the rent we pay on this address. I went to find a hat, a pen, and the exact right amount of skepticism for a private club on 12th Street. Wolfe rang the bell for Fritz, which in our world is one of the more decisive acts a man can commit. The office sighed, and for a second I thought I could smell old rye through solid steel. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe it was a warning. Either way, it had a name now. The Last Whiskey. And like most last things, it was already asking for a next. Fritz did not argue with destiny or artichokes. By 1:30, I'd been fortified with enough garlic to repel a transatlantic vampire, and Wolfe had resumed his territorial claim on the red leather with a book that looked like it would object to being cut short by homicide or its cousins. At 2:10, I was out the door with my hat, my notebook, and a reminder to keep my tongue unclouded. West 12th sits like a man who knows the neighborhood history and finds it tolerable. Demarest's place hid in plain brick with a brass plaque no larger than a cigarette case. The Sovereign Club. The doorman looked like he had been selected for his ability to pronounce members only in 12 moods without moving his lips. I told him I had a 2:30 with Mr. Demarest and displayed Miss Bell's card. He didn't read it. He weighed it, then returned it to me as if he'd tested it for counterfeit dignity and found it passable. Demarest's office was upstairs in a corner that the floor plan had meant for a private smoke and a public deal. The room did not have a view of the street. It had a view of the room. Leather chairs had been told where to sit, and they obeyed. A bar ran along the far wall like a word the sentence was planning to end with. He came in 2 minutes after I did, prompt enough to show he respected a calendar, not so prompt as to show he obeyed one. Franklin Demarest was 50 and refused to pretend otherwise. He was narrow at the shoulders the way some swimmers are, all tendon under good tailoring, with a square jaw that someone had filed as a youth and never let go, blunt. His hair was the shade that ad agencies call distinguished and wives call negotiable. He wore a suit that had earned its stripes at a quiet tailor, and he smiled like an usher with a lamp. Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I've had the pleasure of meeting most of New York, and somehow you and I have missed each other. Welcome to my club." "I'll extend your condolences," I said, and he rewarded me with the kind of chuckle that says you may be amusing, but let's not become a habit. He gestured to a chair that had never squeaked in its life. I took it. He didn't sit behind the desk. He took the facing chair, which in his line of work advertised either frankness or practiced imitation. "May I offer you something? Tea? Coffee?" "Water," I said. "Cold and unambitious." He nodded to a side table, and a carafe obeyed. He poured with care, then took a glass for himself, which earned him a mark on the ledger of men who don't mind symmetry. "I understand," he said, cradling his water as if it had hopes, "that Mr. Bellandy has engaged Mr. Wolfe to adjudicate a rather, let us say, symbolic distribution." "You understand correctly," I told him, "and you're one of the symbols." "That depends," Demarest said, "on who is reading." He crossed a leg. The sock was midnight blue and properly shy. "Salvatore has been my patron and my friend. He keeps a locker here, kept, I suppose we must say, and I've kept his confidences, which are worth more than any locker, even one with a key that opens slowly. You run discretion for a living. I run a place where men do not have to pretend in order to be seen. The oldest luxury in town." "Expensive?" He smiled with the corners only. "The most affordable things in life are often the most costly, Mr. Goodwin, privacy chief among them." "Let's talk the whiskey," I said. "The last one. You told Miss Bell you're a candidate." "I did not tell Miss Bell anything," he said pleasantly. "She told me. She has inherited her grandfather's knack for forcing formality to serve urgency. I admire it in others. In myself, it would be bad for business." "Are you the rightful recipient?" Demarest considered the question as if he were examining a tie for patterns only the fortunate can see. "Rightful," he repeated. "No, worthy perhaps." "On what grounds?" "Custodianship." He lifted the glass and set it back down untouched. "Every man of means needs a place to put what he values where it will be honored but not turned into an altar. Salvatore's palate has been marinated in adoration for decades. Here at least, when he lifted a glass, he did not have to perform gratitude. If the bottle comes to me, it will be opened at the bar, shared sparingly, and emptied with care. No auction, no mantelpiece, no headline. "He wants a public naming," I said, "at the wake." Demarest sighed, which looked rehearsed and probably was. "He cannot help himself. The old man has always known that acts performed in private are remembered for a season. Acts performed in public are remembered until someone rewrites the sign. You'll accept the bottle if Wolfe names you in front of the crowd." "I will accept it anywhere," he said, and now the smile slid. "But I will not wrestle for it. My claim is simple. Loyalty. No priest will outbid me on piety, and no young distiller will outbid me on romance. But neither can match me on stewardship." "Stewardship that pours," I said. "Stewardship that refuses to turn a man's last taste into a relic. That is a small dignity, but I deal in small dignities." He had it phrased and polished. I let a beat go by, then asked, "Do you know Miss Vance?" "Only by the scent of her ambition." He lifted a palm. "That is not a criticism. Ambition is why any little stream becomes a river, but I have poured enough legacy into fluted glasses to know that the word can mean trophy or cudgel. With her I cannot guess." "And Father Vieri?" Demarest's eyes did something that could have been respect if you were willing to be optimistic. "He believes what he says. That makes him formidable and bad company for a bottle with a history of being promised and unpromised. He will say the poor deserve it, and he will mean it. He will also say that an old man's caprice must bow to an older vow. A beautiful argument and a terrible precedent." "If you lose," I asked, "do you plan to take it well?" "I plan," he said, "to be useful afterward, which is how men take things well in my world. But understand me. I would rather Salvatore's last whiskey be enjoyed by people who loved him for his stubbornness than by people who loved him for his publicity. I stood. He did too, with the ease of a man who exercises the right muscles and ignores the rest. "One more," I said. "Between us and the water, did you try to move the bottle before today?" He looked at me, and for the first time his gaze tightened, not to exclude me, but to measure. "No," he said. "If I had it to move, you would not be asking that question. And if someone else tried, I would know," he said. "This city reports to me when an object with a story changes addresses." "Then you'll be interested," I told him, "to learn that the bottle isn't at Belandi's anymore." He let the water touch his mouth, finally. "Of course it isn't," he said. "It's safest in only one room in Manhattan." "Glad we're agreed," I said, and let him show me to the door. Outside, the street had not altered its opinion of itself. I took 3 steps toward 6th and paused because something had, call it scent, call it intuition, call it the leftover whisper of old rye through steel, moved the needle. Across the way, a man with a camera he wasn't using adjusted his cap with 2 fingers and studied a window that didn't deserve it. He had the stance of surveillance done on a budget and the patience of a paid amateur. He wasn't watching me. He was watching the club. I considered introducing myself. I didn't. I drifted instead to the corner and let the reflection in a bakery window show me that he wasn't alone. A second watcher, slimmer, leaned against a delivery van and practiced looking bored. 2 kinds of friends for a man like Demarest: tidy clothes and trucks. Conte's taxonomy traveled well. I walked on, not fast, and let them keep their interest where they wanted it. If Demarest was a steward, someone wanted to supervise his stewardship, or, more to the point, accelerate it. Back at the brownstone, the air was garlic and quiet. I filed my hat, went to the office, and found Wolfe in the same posture, the book now a different one with an older spine. He didn't ask if I had been prudent. He asked what I had seen. I gave him Demarest's pitch, clean and complete, and finished with the men on the curb. He nodded once, slow. "We will postpone Mr. Vieri until tomorrow," he said. "This evening you will make a call on Miss Vance. I wish to know whether she prefers her legacies bottled, branded, or baited." "Baited?" "Someone," he said, eyes closing for a measured breath, "is testing whether our bottle lures only fish or also sharks. It will be useful to learn who brought the chum." I don't argue with Wolfe's grammar when he says, "make a call on." In his vocabulary, a call can be a telephone, a doorstep, or a form of pressure. I took it as the first kind and dialed the number Ms. Bell had penciled on the receipt, expecting a rural ring with chickens in the background. What I got was clean city switchboard and a voice that could pour or cut, depending on the glass. "Vance," it said. "Archie Goodwin. I'm calling on behalf of Nero Wolfe. Miss Bell said 10 tomorrow at your place. My employer would like a word tonight if your calendar has a sliver." "I'm in New York," she said. And then let it sit there, the way some people put a glass on the bar to test the bartender. "Distributor meeting at 7. Iron Kettle on 26th. If Mr. Wolfe wants the word at the source, he'll have to settle for the spigot." "Mr. Wolfe prefers decanters," I told her, "but he also prefers facts. I'll be there." "The man himself?" "His legs," I said. She laughed once, approval with an edge. "Bring your own tongue." I checked with Wolfe, who nodded without looking up. "Observe," he said, "and prod where vanity swells." The Iron Kettle was one of those bars that hadn't decided whether to be a tavern, a lab, or a stage, and was succeeding at all 3 by accident. The back wall was a parade of bottles that had been curated into submission. The bartender wore a mustache that would have disqualified him from several wars. In a corner booth, Leora Vance had positioned herself like a banner before a charge. She was 32 if my eye behaved. compact and straight-backed, with hair that had once been chastened by a braid and was now making its own decisions. She wore black, not the funereal kind, the kind that tells light where to go. A man with a distributor's smile sat across from her, doing the nod and understand routine. I waited at the bar with water that aspired to be ice and watched. She didn't touch the 3 samples in front of her, except to move them into a little choreography that implied she could smell temperature. When she saw me, she gave a flick with 2 fingers. Not a summons, a grant. "Goodwin," she said, after the rep had been dismissed with a future. "You kept your tongue unclouded? My boss would like to borrow it later." "Then we'll use our eyes," she said, and gestured to the glasses. "This one's my rye. This one's what passes for prime in half the city. This one's a promise someone else forgot to keep." She put a finger near the 3rd. "We'll talk about promises." "I'm listening," I said. She didn't hurry. People who know how to pour stories don't spill. When I was 24, Mr. Belandi decided the city didn't know rye anymore. He brought me on for palate and stubbornness. He taught me blending like a man teaching a language he enjoys swearing in. He also promised me that when he was done lording his legends over a shelf, the last bottle of the old batch would go to someone who would use it to teach and not to brag. That was the word. Not charity, not loyalty. Use. And that someone is you. If there's a better one, I haven't tasted it. Her mouth tilted, not quite a smile. He wrote it on a page in his little black book. Yes, he has one. And then, because he's Salvatore, he spent 5 years telling that story to people who made good furniture out of it. "Then the priest," I said. "Then the priest," she acknowledged. "I don't dislike clergy. I dislike a public auction of private content. You sell that bottle for charity, and what you have on stage is Salvatore's temper in a tux." "And Demarest?" "A vault with mirrors," she said, and it was so close to my phrase I felt a tug. "Frankie would pour it, oh yes. A dram for the right widow, a dram for the right deal, and he'll get credit for being the man who didn't hoard. He's not wrong, he's just not the point." I let the point dangle and looked past her shoulder to the street-side window because something in the glass did what it had done outside the Sovereign Club, collected attention. A figure across the way adjusted a cap with 2 fingers and turned 1 degree to get a better line on the door. His jacket didn't fit him the way jackets fit men who choose their jackets. A second was posted farther down, pretending he had text to drown in. If they were angels, they were the unemployed kind. "Expecting company?" I asked. "I told one of Sal's boys where I'd be," she said. "Not for protection, for acknowledgement. When you poke the hive, it's polite to hum." She followed my glance and added, "They're not mine. Trucks or tidy clothes?" "Trucks," I said, "but with city dust on the soles." She tapped the 3rd glass. "The promise," she said. "He wrote it, not to me, to himself. He said, 'The last goes to Kraft.'" He showed me. Then he pretended not to remember for a while because leverage is a habit and memory is a victim. I don't need a priest to tell me vows matter. I need Nero Wolfe to tell a room that a man's best self gets to have the last word. "You're not shy with words," I said. "Do you plan to be shy with the bottle?" "If I get it," she said, "we'll take half an ounce off it once a year for 6 years, with 6 apprentices, and the lesson will not be filmed. That's my proposal, that and this." She slid a small card across. On it, a neat photograph of a moleskin page, the ink old but not elderly, with a line I could read without squinting. "Last goes to Kraft. S.B. "That book," I asked, "still exists?" "In his nightstand," she said, "unless someone has decided memories travel better." She tilted her head. "Which brings us to you. Why did they move the bottle?" "Because they want to see who moves," I said. So far, the list includes everyone. We let that be the truth it was. I left her with her glass formations and the sort of reputation that doesn't need help, and took 26th to Broadway, where the air was cooler and the crowds unhelpful. The two watchers didn't follow me. They were there for the door, not for a pair of legs with nothing obvious in their pockets. I let the city carry me back. At the brownstone, Fritz had decided the exact hour demanded caramelized onions as a condition of grace. The front hall was orderly. The rug gave no testimony. But when I stepped into the office, something was wrong in the way a comma is wrong. The chair that faces the globe by the window had been nudged half an inch. It's the sort of movement a man makes when he sits carefully and leaves guiltily. "Fritz," I called. He appeared with his towel like a truce flag. "No one has been admitted," he said, offended by the implication. "The bell." "Twice. Once at 5:30. No one when I opened. Once at 6, a flyer," he added, and produced it from a pocket as if it had smudged his honor. A glossy card for San Callisto Harvest Fair, charity auction, Thursday. On the back, in blue ballpoint, a line. "Promises keep better in public." I took the card to Wolfe. He lifted his eyes, then the brows, then the corner of his mouth, incrementally. I told him Vance's story and showed him the photo of the notebook page. He regarded it without touching, as if fingerprints were opinions. He said. "If the inscription is genuine, and if the book remains where habits would keep it, both are unstable assumptions." The watchers at the club had cousins at the kettle. Of course, the more eyes upon the bait, the better to see which fish circles first. He flicked the charity card. "And this is the chum." "The chair," I said. Moved. He shut his eyes, counted 3, opened them. Not by Fritz, therefore by an intruder with the sense to test the house and the insolence to sit. "Archie, check the locks, the windows, and the basement hatch. Then telephone Fred." "I do not want a parade. I want idling." "Fred earns by idling," I said, and went to do what the man told me. The windows were unmarred, the hatch shut with our extra bolt, the locks virginal. If someone came in, it was through the kind of entrance you can't install, only inherit. I called Fred Durkin and arranged for his car to find a friendly spot within sight of the door. He asked if he should bring appetite or patience. I told him patience and sandwiches. When I returned, Wolfe had pushed the charity flyer under a paperweight as if to domesticate it. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will go to Father Vieri at 4, not at 10, and to Miss Vance's distillery at 10 as planned. Before that, at 9, you will call on Mr. Belandi's apartment. You will look in a nightstand. What if the boy with tidy clothes answers? You will use your tongue." He folded his fingers across his middle. "They have announced themselves. It is courteous to reply. And if the notebook isn't there, then," he said, with more pleasure than the sentence deserved, "we will have learned which promise someone prefers to steal first." At 9 the next morning, I was standing in front of the Belandi apartment building on Riverside Drive, one of those respectable pre-war piles that manages to look both expensive and tired, like a duke with gout. The doorman knew enough to measure visitors before admitting them. I handed him a card and told him the visit was expected. It wasn't, but people in his line prefer confident lies to honest confusion. He phoned upstairs, listened, frowned, and waved me in with a finger that meant take the side elevator. The apartment door opened halfway, held there by a man with tired eyes and the kind of voice that has outlived several cigars. "Mr. Goodwin, I'm Paolo, Mr. Belandi's nurse." His accent was as faint as the thread of patience left in him. "He's awake, but you'll keep it short. He had a bad night." I promised I'd be swift as mercy and followed him down a hallway that smelled of lemon oil and morphine. The walls were a museum of photographs. Sal Belandi with baseball players, governors, an occasional bishop. He'd collected power the way other men collected stamps. In the bedroom, the man himself looked smaller than legend permits, a block of face under a shock of white hair, eyes as bright and mistrustful as a bird's. On the table by his bed lay a Bible, a glass of water, and an empty space shaped exactly like a missing book. "Sir," he said, his voice dry and brittle but sharp enough to cut cheese. "Wolfe's errand boy." "That's me," I said. "The legs. He keeps the brains and most of the charm." He smiled the way men smile when they don't want to, and motioned to a chair. "What's he make of my little puzzle?" "He's keeping it in the safe," I said. "The bottle's fine. The question's who isn't." He chuckled once, a sound that had more effort than joy. "I thought sending it there might shake a few cages. They always come sniffing when you move a piece off the board." "Speaking of cages," I said, "Miss Vance mentioned a note you wrote in a small black book. She claims you wrote that the last bottle goes to Kraft. Still have it?" His eyes went to the nightstand like a reflex, then back to me, sharper. "I did," he said. "I wrote that line, sure. I wrote a lot of things over the years, sometimes to keep myself honest, sometimes to fool the people reading after me. Clever habit, except someone may have decided the notebook makes better reading than you intended." I nodded at the table. "That space? Recent?" He looked, frowned, then lifted his hand. "Paolo," he said, and the nurse came from the hallway like a man summoned from a longer story. "Where's my notebook?" Paolo hesitated. "You had it yesterday morning. I haven't seen it since." Belandi turned back to me. "It's gone, isn't it? Good. Now the game will move faster." "Depends on who's playing," I said. "You mind telling me what's in it besides your to-do list?" "Names, dates, people who earned something or didn't, and a few small lies that helped the truth go down easy." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "That book's the real will, Goodwin. The whiskey's the bait. Whoever has the nerve to take one will reach for the other." That was enough to chill the coffee I hadn't had. I asked if anyone had visited the night before. "Only Father Vieri," Paolo said. "At 6. He prayed with him, left at 7. Belandi chuckled again. "He prayed, sure." Then he eyed the shelf. "The Lord's Work, Inventory Edition." He coughed and leaned back. "Spent. You tell Wolfe he'll find more sin in those 3 names than in a year's worth of police reports. And tell him not to be too clever. Someone's liable to make him prove it." I left him with the nurse and a look that said he'd planned this whole circus for the pleasure of watching it run without him. In the elevator, I checked my watch. 10:30. Just enough time to get upstate to Miss Vance's distillery before noon. The ride north was all asphalt and questions. If the notebook was missing, somebody wanted proof or leverage. Either way, it made Wolfe's safe look more like a bullseye. I called him from the car, told him what was gone, and heard the pause that meant his brain was rearranging furniture. "Then," he said finally, "we have confirmation that the trespass was deliberate and the visitor informed. Return when you have extracted whatever truth Miss Vance retains. Be careful what you promise. The next theft will not be of paper." It was noon when I turned off the main road and found Vance's spirits nestled between 2 barns and a patch of golden weeds. The place smelled like heaven to anyone who likes fermentation. Inside, copper stills gleamed under skylights, and a few workers moved with the efficiency of people who have learned not to spill ambition. Leora came down from a stairwell, lab coat over black again, clipboard in hand. "You found the notebook?" she asked, reading my face. "It found a new admirer," I said. "You have an alibi for last night." If I needed one, I'd invent better hours than I had. "Inventory till 10. 2 employees, both honest until payday." "Father Vieri came calling," I said, "right after he left Belandi's." She snorted softly. "To save the soul of a distiller? He's been saving Sal's for 30 years and hasn't found the right container." She studied me. "He's next, isn't he?" "At 4, I said. "You have advice?" "Ask him how a man can steal faith without touching a bottle," she said. "Then check your pockets afterward." I thanked her and turned to go, but she called after me. "Goodwin, if Wolfe finds that notebook. Tell him to read the last page first. That's where Sal keeps the lie he once believed. The drive back to the city was quieter, the kind of quiet that listens. I parked near the brownstone just after 3 and saw Fred's car down the block, engine idle. He gave me a nod that meant nothing had moved. The street was calm, the house unchanged. But when I let myself in, the first thing I noticed was the faint smell of peat and smoke, like someone had exhaled an old whiskey dream. Fritz met me in the hall, pale. "Mr. Goodwin, someone delivered a package." "No sender. It was on the stoop when I returned from market. Mr. Wolfe is waiting." In the office, Wolfe was standing, a rare seismic event, beside his desk. On it sat a brown paper parcel, neatly wrapped, roughly the size of a notebook. He looked at me, eyes steady. "Open it," he said. I did. Inside was a black leather book, old and familiar, and a single folded note on top written in blue ballpoint. "Promises keep better in public." The same phrase from the flyer. I lifted the notebook. The pages smelled of dust and rye and fresh ink. Somewhere between the lines I could feel the next move being made. Wolfe sank back into his chair and murmured, "We have our trespasser, Archie. Now let's see whether they came to return what they stole, or to bait what they want." I've seen Wolfe look at a roast duck with less intensity than he gave that notebook. He didn't touch it right away. He just stared at it as if he could extract fingerprints with his mind. The office was quiet except for the hum from the orchids upstairs. Fritz had closed the kitchen door, which meant he was listening from the hall like a man guarding a relic. "Archie," Wolfe said finally, "wash your hands." I did. When Wolfe says that, you don't ask whether he's joking. I came back with clean fingers and the mild irritation of a man being treated like a surgeon without the pay. He gestured for me to lift the top page of the notebook while he leaned forward, not out of curiosity, but out of control. The first few pages were as old as the paper promised. Belandi's crabbed handwriting, neat but hurried, lists of shipments, debts, recipes, tasting notes. Then, about halfway through, the ink changed color and the writing steadied. The entries got personal. Names, not just Vance, Demarest and Vieri, but several others. Men with initials, women with dates, notes that could be reminders or accusations. One entry, near the back, had been underlined twice. The last goes to Kraft, unless Kraft forgets why it matters. Wolfe made a sound that might have been satisfaction. He modified it, he said, and he intended the ambiguity to survive him. Craft without conscience is vanity, and vanity is the true whiskey of men like Belandi. Pfui. I flipped the next page. The ink there was different, newer, ballpoint, and the handwriting wasn't Belandi's. It was neat, feminine, legal in its patience. "Ms. Bell," I said. "No question." The note was brief. "The promise will keep better if someone else holds it. I'll bring it back when I'm sure he's safe." Wolfe's nostrils flared once. So she was the intruder, not a thief, a custodian. "She broke into our house," I said. "That's a lousy way to advertise honesty." "She didn't break in," he said. "The door was not forced. The chair by the globe was moved, not disturbed. She has been here before." That much was true. She had been calm enough the first visit to map the place. I could see her coming back. Quiet shoes, steady hands, the nerve of a woman who's had to stand her ground in family rooms full of men who shout to feel alive. Wolfe leaned back, closed his eyes, and began to think in that way that makes conversation irrelevant. I left him to it and thumbed through the notebook again. On the final page in a corner was a faint smudge of red wax, like something had rested there briefly, heavy and warm. "The bottle?" I asked. Wolfe opened one eye. "No, the seal. A memory of its presence. Belandi must have once rested it there while recording some indulgent note to himself. And now, He pointed at the folded message that had come with the package. That handwriting isn't Miss Bell's. It's masculine, hurried, and written by a man unused to pens. Conte, I said. Wolfe didn't reply, which is his way of agreeing when agreement costs him nothing. Then Conte found her, I went on. Maybe took the notebook from her, maybe not. Either way, he's the one who dropped it off. Maybe he wants to prove his loyalty before Belandi's ghost stops writing checks. No, Wolfe said, opening both eyes. If Conte wanted to prove loyalty, he would return it directly to Belandi, not to us. He brought it here because he knew it would be safe, and because he fears what it reveals. He tapped the last page with a finger thick enough to make the paper complain. Read it aloud. I did. The handwriting was Belandi's again, unsteady but defiant. 3 debts, 1 owed to faith, 1 to loyalty, 1 to craft. Let the one who remembers the difference drink. It didn't take a degree in theology to see that Belandi had built a riddle and left Wolfe to solve it. Wolfe folded his arms. He means for each to argue the same virtue from a different vice. It is perverse and deliberate. He was staging morality for entertainment. Then the bottle's a prop. More than that, he said. It is the mirror. Each will see in it what they worship. Miss Vance will see art. Demarest, discretion. Father Vieri, redemption. Miss Bell may see none of these, which makes her the most dangerous. Because she doesn't want the bottle. Because she may want it only to end the argument. The phone rang. I crossed and lifted it. A quiet voice said, "Mr. Goodwin, this is Fred. Thought you'd want to know. Conte just parked across the street. Alone. He's carrying something wrapped in a towel. He's been sitting there 5 minutes. Stay put, I told him. No heroics." When I hung up, Wolfe was already watching me. "Conte," he said. "He's here. Or close enough." "Invite him," Wolfe said. "Now. Now." I went down, opened the front door, and looked out. Conte was standing on the curb, broad and still, the towel parcel cradled in his arms like an offering. When he saw me, he nodded once and came up the steps. He didn't speak until he was inside and the door was closed behind him. "I wasn't followed," he said, "and I need your employer to hold this." He lifted the towel. Underneath was a smaller bottle, dark glass, wax seal. Not the same as Belandi's last whiskey, but it had the same seal pattern, the same wax color, the same age of dust. "Another?" I asked. Conte nodded. "There were 2. Nobody knew except me and Sal. The other 3 think there's only 1. He told me to keep this hidden until the day the rightful one was named." He hesitated. "Now I'm not sure which is which." I took it, careful as if it might bite, and led him into the office. Wolfe didn't rise. He simply pointed to the desk. Conte placed the bottle beside the notebook and stepped back. His voice dropped. "Father Vieri came to see me this morning. Said the Lord didn't need 2 relics. Said he'd pray that I choose the right one. He wasn't praying." "Threats?" Wolfe asked. "Suggestions," Conte said. "I don't take suggestions well." "No," Wolfe said. "You don't. Yet here you are, making one." Conte looked at the notebook, then at me. "Tell Mr. Wolfe I'm done carrying other people's debts. Thursday night I'm out. But until then, I'll be near." He turned and left before I could test his sincerity. When the door closed, Wolfe let out a long, slow breath. 2 bottles, he said. 1 truth, a thief with conscience, a priest with ambition, and a dying man who loved riddles. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that only appears when the game's gotten interesting. "Archie, call Saul Panzer. We will need him by tonight. I fear our bottle has become a covenant, and covenants are notoriously poor at keeping themselves." Saul answered on the second ring with the tone of a man already halfway to where you need him. I gave him the short course. 1 bottle became 2. a notebook that left and came home with a sermon stapled to it, and Conte doing towel service, and told him to take a quiet drift past the Sovereign Club, San Callisto, and the Iron Kettle. "Watchers, runners, and printers," I said. "If anybody's buying blue ballpoints by the gross, I want their baptismal name." "Got it," Saul said. "Plates, faces, and who they nod to." Wolfe didn't touch either bottle. He drew them closer with 2 fingers, the way a man aligns chessmen before deciding whether the board offends him. "Observe," he said. "Twine on bottle A, the original, crossed over right to left, not tucked under with a nail nick. On bottle B, left to right, not faced. Whoever sealed B is left-handed or imitating one." He tilted his head. "Oulage on A is lower by a whisper. Glass ripple at the punt on B is newer. They were born together. They did not age together." "Which is the last?" I asked. "Belandi would call both last if it pleased him," Wolfe said. "But A is the elder in spirit. We will not open them. We will let the covetous tell us which they intend." I told him I had an appointment with Father Vieri at 4. He nodded, then added, "Take the notebook. Not the bottles. I want to see how a man of vows looks at a ledger of sins. He may prefer paper he can sanctify." At 3:45 I was in San Callisto's rectory, where the air smelled like old varnish, newer incense, and the kind of coffee that has a long history of boiling. Father Anselmo Vieri had a wrestler's neck and a pianist's hands, dark eyes that took in the room once and remembered it, and a mouth made for both absolution and argument. On his desk, a stack of the Harvest Fair flyers, a blue ballpoint neglected on a saucer, and a brass key that could have opened a decent locker or a small temptation. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "I know you by reputation. We pass the plate for sins of omission as well as commission." "I'm here for a promise," I said, and set the notebook where he could see the cover, but not the last page. "You visited Mr. Belandi last night." "He is dying," Father Vieri said, "and it wasn't pious. It was simple. He asked for prayer. I gave it. He asked for memory. I offered that too. Did he also ask you to inventory the nightstand?" He smiled with one side of his mouth. "If a man confesses with his eyes, am I to wear a blindfold? You left him at 7. After that, the notebook went missing." "Ah," he said softly. "Missing from his house and found in yours. Promises keep better in public." The phrase sat there like a trademark. "You write that line often?" "I speak it often," he said. "Others write it when I'm tired." I glanced at the blue ballpoint. His fingers were clean of ink, but on the saucer a smudge told the pen had been bullied. A man used to fountain pens had tried it and put it down like a bad parishioner. His eyes flicked to the notebook's spine and stilled. "You believe the poor do not count, Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. "I believe they count," I said. "I'm checking who's doing the math." "Salvatore promised a charity auction," he said. "He did it with relish and renounced it with a hangover. We do not make covenants with a man's second thoughts. We make them with his first. What about this?" I pushed the book a shade forward and tapped the margin where the wax smear had ghosted. He once rested the bottle on these words: "Last goes to craft, unless craft forgets why it matters." Where does that fit on your altar? "In front," he said without blinking. "Craft is good if it serves the good. Otherwise it is appetite in a tuxedo. What does your employer serve?" "Lunch," I said, "and then whatever truth shows up on a plate." I stood. "Thursday night you'll get your public." "Thursday night," he said, and I heard steel under the syllables. "The poor will be seen. That is all I ask." Outside, I called Saul. He had product. 2 of the faces outside the Sovereign Club belonged to the San Callisto Men's Association. Got their photo on the parish bulletin site shaking hands with the father over a truck full of canned beans. Van plate matches the one near the Iron Kettle. They're not Demarest's boys. And the flyers? Printed at a shop on Ninth that does parish work. Belandi's family has never used them. Ms. Bell uses a place on Madison. Demarest has in-house. This is Father's drumbeat. Ms. Bell. Left the Brownstone neighborhood at 6:30 last night, alone, wearing shoes that don't squeak. Stopped for 10 minutes at a mailbox on 10th with no camera. After that, straight home. Conte. Met with Ms. Bell this morning at a diner 2 blocks from St. Luke's. No towel. Came away with one after. I hung up and let the river of 10th Avenue try to drown my conclusions. Back at the Brownstone, Wolfe had the chair pitched a degree toward the safe, which equals vigilance in his language. I relayed Vieri's sermon, Saul's bulletin, and the Van plate. Good, Wolfe said. Father Vieri is capable of hypocrisy in the name of virtue. That is the most efficient kind. He tapped the notebook. Miss Bell took this, then returned it by intercession of Conte. She feared what it meant in her grandfather's hands, and more, in the priest's. Conte feared being blamed if it remained missing. He chose us as a laundering machine for conscience. The second bottle? A reserve to make the test more elaborate. Either Salvatore meant to reveal it at the wake as the benediction of abundance, or Conte meant to hold it as insurance. In either case, we will not perform their spectacle. He closed his eyes, opened them. We will set our own. You want Saul and Fred where? Saul at San Callisto, watching who counts heads and who counts cash. Fred here, with his engine off and his eyes on our step. You will telephone Mr. Demarest and Miss Vance. Tell each that at 9 tonight I will authenticate the bottle. Not by taste, by provenance. Say nothing of 2. Say only that the object will be displayed briefly for inspection. That invites a parade. It invites choice, Wolfe said. Men show themselves when they think they are choosing. We will let them choose how to trespass. I made the calls. Demarest was cool and agreeable. I'll come alone, he said, which with his kind means with ghosts you can't see. Vance was brisk. If you show me a lie, I'll know it, she said, and hung up with the efficiency of a woman who files conversations under ingredients. Dusk settled like a receipt. Fritz, uneasy, prepared dinner that Wolfe ignored, which is the sort of insult only safety can provoke. At 8:40 the bell rang and Fred's car did not. That meant he'd seen it first. I went down, found Demarest immaculate. No hat, the sort of cologne that arrives with references. He stepped in and took in the room the way a broker takes in a deal, without licking his lips. At 9:02, Leora Vance arrived in a jacket that made promises to weather and none to decorum. She nodded to Demarest like a woman acknowledging another mountain and sat without accepting water. We waited. 9:10, 9:15, the bell again. I opened, and there stood Father Vieri, with 2 parishioners behind him and a look that translated to public enough. I told the parishioners to wait on the stoop. He objected with his eyebrows. I closed with my door. Wolfe didn't stand. He didn't have to. He let his eyes sweep, then said, "Here we are. Loyalty, craft, and faith. We will have no auction, no toasts, and no sermon. We will have recognition." He nodded once, and I moved to the safe. As the dial turned, I felt the room tighten like a drumhead. When the door opened, I reached in, slow, and lifted bottle A to the desk. It wasn't there. In the space where we had left it, on bare steel, lay a single loop of old twine, snipped clean. For a few seconds no one spoke. Even the orchids upstairs seemed to hold their breath. Wolfe's gaze fixed on that loop of twine like it was a riddle printed in Morse code. I bent closer, touched the cold metal shelf where bottle A had lived, and felt the thin dust smear, freshly disturbed, one clean semicircle left by glass that had recently departed. Demarest's voice came first, low and smooth. "Mr. Wolfe, are we to assume this is part of your demonstration?" Wolfe's eyelids lowered a fraction. "If I intended a demonstration, Mr. Demarest, you would already be applauding." Leora Vance leaned forward, eyes sharp as cut rye. "You had it under lock. No one's been near that safe except—" She stopped because finishing the sentence would have named the house we were all sitting in. Father Vieri folded his hands, the picture of patience in black wool. "Perhaps Providence wishes to spare us temptation." "Providence," I said, "hasn't rung the doorbell tonight." But somebody did. Quietly. I crossed to the door. Fred's signal light on the stoop was dark, which meant he was still outside, still watching. I cracked the door, checked the hallway. Empty. No footsteps, no air shift. Whoever had been here had known the timing better than an orchestra's conductor. Wolfe's voice behind me was level, but edged. "Close it, Archie. We are not invaded. We are instructed." When I turned, he was already studying his guests, one by one, as if rearranging their order in his mind. "The bottle is gone," he said. "Gone precisely at the moment it was to be displayed. That is neither coincidence nor theft. It is punctuation." Vance's hand went to her coat pocket, then stopped short. "You think one of us—" "I think," Wolfe interrupted, "that Mr. Belandi has arranged one last movement in his symphony of deceit, and I suspect one of you has chosen to play it for him." Demarest's brow creased. "He is bedridden." "Indeed," Wolfe said, "yet influence travels where legs do not. Mr. Conti was here this afternoon, you recall, carrying his towel and his contrition. He left with nothing, or so we assumed. I caught on. He could have switched bottles when I was out of the room." "Easily," Wolfe said. "And when the thief tonight opened the safe—" Vance cut in. "Opened? You're certain it was opened?" "Observe the dial," Wolfe said. I looked. The pointer rested one notch past 0, exactly where I'd left it after closing, but the thin trace of fingerprint powder, Wolfe's idea of house hygiene, was smudged in a pattern too neat for accident. Someone who knew what he was doing, or followed someone who did. Father Vieri rose, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Wolfe, this is beyond morality. You're speaking of desecration." "I am speaking," Wolfe said, "of deliberate drama, and you, sir, have rehearsed it." The priest's eyes flashed. "I have rehearsed nothing." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "Your parishioners waited outside. You brought witnesses to ensure the moment had gravity. You also brought opportunity. 2 minutes before you entered, my man outside saw a figure cross the street carrying what looked very much like a wrapped bottle. The distance from that curb to my door is 30 paces. You knocked at 9:15. In those 2 minutes, whoever brought the decoy, perhaps one of your parish volunteers, had time to use the servant's door and deliver it to you. You came bearing sanctity and left bearing substitution." "Substitution?" Vieri repeated. "What nonsense!" "I opened the second safe compartment, the one we'd used for bottle B." Wolfe gestured. "If you would, Archie." I lifted the towel-wrapped twin Conte had delivered. The wax seal was intact, but as I held it to the light, the label shimmered differently. A faint newness, the ink too crisp. Someone had copied the original in haste. "Gentlemen, lady," Wolfe said, "this is not Belandi's whiskey. It is an echo. The true bottle is now absent, and the forgery left as moral camouflage." Demarest stood, his calm starting to fray. "That is absurd. Why would Father Vieri stage such a farce?" Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. "Because, Mr. Demarest, a charity auction without a relic raises only applause. An auction where the relic is stolen raises faith." Vieri's jaw hardened. "You accuse a priest of theft?" "No," Wolfe said. "I accuse a priest of pageantry. You arranged for the bottle to disappear so that its reappearance, tomorrow night perhaps, could be hailed as a miracle. A test of conscience passed through your hands. Your note, 'Promises keep better in public,' was the prologue. He leaned back, eyes half closed. But you made one mistake. You believed you had replaced the correct bottle when you sent your messenger to deliver it here. The bottle Conte brought us was the reserve. The one you took tonight is the fake. You will discover that when you unseal it for your faithful and pour dust instead of whiskey. The room went very still. Vieri's lips parted, then closed, a muscle jumping in his cheek. Demarest's expression shifted from skepticism to something colder, relief disguised as amusement. Then the good father's miracle will need better editing. Vance exhaled. Belandi must be enjoying this. He turned us into a tasting flight of egos. Wolfe's eyes opened again. He also turned deceit into inheritance. The man sought to test virtue by scarcity. Instead, he exposed it by opportunity. I watched Vieri. His shoulders were tight, his gaze fixed on the fake bottle. You have no proof, he said, softly but with weight. Proof is for courts, Wolfe said. I traffic in revelation. Still, he gestured toward me. Archie, bring the towel in which Conte carried bottle B. I fetched it from the sideboard where I'd tossed it earlier. Wolfe pointed. Smell. I did. It wasn't rye. It was candle wax and church incense. Wolfe's voice had finality in it. Conte never touched your switch, Father. You did, and you wrapped your forgery in the nearest cloth that would not betray you, one soaked in sanctity. Vieri didn't answer. He only stared at Wolfe, then at me, then turned to the door. Tomorrow, he said, God will decide whose promises keep. When he was gone, Demarest let out a thin laugh and rubbed his forehead. This is finished, I hope. No, Wolfe said, not finished. Merely decanted. Vance rose. And what about the real bottle? Wolfe shut the safe and spun the dial. It is where Belandi intended it to be, hidden from virtue, loyalty, and craft alike. But not, I think, from reason. Tomorrow's wake will tell us who understands the difference. Demarest looked at me. And if no one does? I answered for Wolfe. Then we'll drink water, Mr. Demarest, and call it justice. He left first. Vance next. Wolfe stayed silent until their engines faded down 35th. Then he said, Fred will follow the priest. Saul will. Shadow Conte. Tomorrow, Archie, you will go to the wake and watch who looks thirsty. Thirsty for what? I asked. Wolfe's eyes closed again. For absolution, my dear Archie. It always has the best bouquet. Morning came like a mild threat, grey, tight, and humming with the kind of silence New York holds right before something inconvenient happens. I was up early, coffee in hand, running down my notes for the wake. Wolfe, naturally, was not up. He had announced at 1 a.m. that the case was in its ripening phase, and therefore required dormancy. His, not mine. When he finally appeared in the office, freshly shaven and exuding calm disapproval of the universe, I had the details ready. Fred had followed Father Vieri to the rectory. The priest had not gone to bed. He'd met twice with the same parish men who'd stood outside Wolfe's the night before. At 3:30, a truck left San Callisto, destination unknown, but the back door had been loaded with something shaped like a crate. Saul trailed Conte through the same dark hours. Conte had gone to Belandi's apartment, stayed 20 minutes, and left carrying nothing visible. Wolfe listened without interruption, then said, Belandi is still alive. Barely, I said. The nurse told Saul he drifted in and out all night, asking for the bottle, then saying, let them find it themselves. Which, Wolfe murmured, is precisely what he meant to happen. He's forcing disclosure by desire. I would almost admire him if it were not so vulgar. At noon, Fritz served lunch heavy enough to flatten a confession out of most men, but Wolfe was eating with unusual precision, as if each bite were a note in a melody only he heard. When he finished, he dabbed his mouth and said, You will attend the wake, of course. Sit where you can see the casket, the table, and the priest. Speak to no one unless spoken to. You will have the notebook in your inner pocket. It is bait, Archie, but a polite one. Any particular behavior you want me to watch for? I asked. Yes, he said. Who looks at the bottle before they look at the man? San Callisto was full by 5:30. The air was incense and tension, both measured to the ounce. Belandi lay in a heavy oak casket, hands folded over his chest, a faint half-smile that might have been satisfaction or gas. At the foot of the dais stood a side table draped in white linen, and on that table, for every eye to see, a bottle. Not the fake one. Not quite. I recognized the glass shape, but the wax was resealed. Still red, but darker, as though someone had tinted it to hide a repair. A neat card in front read, "The Last Whiskey. To be given at the hour of remembrance." Father Vieri stood behind the pulpit, black sleeves flowing, voice sonorous. He spoke of charity, legacy, forgiveness, and the frailty of men who live by their appetites. He did not look at the bottle, not once, but his parish, assistants. 2 of them did, alternating glances like a metronome. Demarest was in the second pew, composed but not calm. His eyes flicked around the crowd like a man counting shares. Leor Avance stood in the back, hat pulled low, hands clasped around something in her purse. She wasn't praying. I took a seat near the aisle, and after 10 minutes of holy rhetoric, the lights dimmed to candle glow. Vieri announced the moment of testament. 2 parishmen stepped forward, carrying a polished box meant for donations. When they set it on the same table as the bottle, I saw one of them slip something beneath the cloth. My pulse kicked once, just for rhythm. Vieri raised his hands. Tonight, we honor a man whose final act was generosity. His bottle, his symbol, will serve the poor. May this spirit pour only goodness. It was elegant stagecraft, and right then, the stage collapsed. Conte appeared at the back, bulk framed by the door, his voice like sandpaper on glass. "You're lying, Father." The room spun toward him. The parish men froze, half lifting the cloth. Conte strode up the aisle, each step a closing argument. He reached the table, ripped the linen aside, and grabbed the bottle. "This isn't Sal's. It's the decoy you made." He turned to the crowd. "Ask him what he did with the real one." Vieri's face didn't flinch, but his hands clenched. "You desecrate a church, Mr. Conte." "Sal made me promise it wouldn't end as a performance," Conte said. "He knew you'd stage a miracle. He told me to stop it." I moved closer, ready to help if things went physical, but Wolfe's earlier words, "Speak to no one unless spoken to," were still in my ear. I stayed put, watching the pieces collide. Demarest rose. "Gentlemen, for decency's sake, this is a funeral, not a scandal." Vance's voice came from the back. "Oh, it's both, Mr. Demarest. Let him speak." She stepped forward now, eyes bright under the low hat. "Because if that bottle's fake, then the real one's in the wrong hands, and I can prove it." She opened her purse and took out a photograph. The notebook's final page, enlarged. "Sal's last line," she said. "Let the one who remembers the difference drink." The difference between truth and display. That bottle, she pointed at the fake, was display. The crowd murmured, uneasy. Vieri's composure cracked just enough to let the truth show through. "Mr. Wolfe told me you would say that," came a voice from the side doorway. It was Wolfe himself, walking into a church like a man inspecting a greenhouse. He had never looked larger or more inconvenient. "You presume to conduct judgment here," Vieri said sharply. "I presume to end farce," Wolfe answered. "Archie." I went to him. He held out a small velvet pouch, one I hadn't seen before, and motioned for me to place it on the table. When I opened it, the real bottle came, Out, wax unbroken, label browned with age, scent faint but unmistakable. Gasps fluttered like moths. "This," Wolfe said, "was never in my safe. It was hidden in Belandi's study behind the false panel of his humidor, placed there by Miss Bell last night at his request. She wished to spare all of you the humiliation of proving yourselves unworthy." He turned to Vieri. "Your men delivered a decoy for the purpose of public virtue. Mr. Conte wished to restore a version of loyalty. Miss Vance came here tonight ready to expose both. But only one person understood Belandi's instruction, that virtue, without humility, is theater." He looked at me. Archie read the final addendum. I unfolded a slip tucked beneath the bottle's wax seal, handwritten in Belandi's last scrawl. "If you find this, you've already lost it. The whiskey belongs to no one who wants it." For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then Wolfe's voice filled the church. "There is your answer. The rightful recipient is abstinence. Belandi's last whiskey remains unopened as it should. He made a spectacle of his own excess to remind you all what it costs." No one argued. Even Vieri lowered his eyes. Wolfe handed the bottle to me. "Take it home, back to the safe. Let it age another century in peace." As we left the church, Conte caught my arm. "So none of us gets it?" "No," I said. "That's the point. He poured his last round before he died, and we're still sobering up." Back at the brownstone, Wolfe settled in his chair, hands folded, eyes half shut. Fritz brought beer, and I poured. "Justice?" I asked. "Hardly," Wolfe said. "Merely equilibrium." He took a slow sip, then added, "Belandi made whiskey of his vanity and sermon of his deceit. He has my admiration." I leaned against the desk. "And the bottle?" He smiled faintly. "It will rest. Some temptations are too instructive to destroy." Outside, the city was loud again. Inside, the brownstone breathed its usual peace. Dinner followed, then silence. Wolfe, as always, had the last word, spoken to no one in particular. "Morality," he said, "is a flavor best left untasted." By the next morning, the city had shaken off its reverence and gone back to selling illusions for breakfast. The papers carried 2 paragraphs on Belandi's wake, none of them mentioning the bottle, all of them heavy on legend, craft, and beloved philanthropist. Wolfe read them without expression, except for a single low grunt that could have meant contempt, digestion, or both. He folded the paper precisely and said, "Belandi's obsequies were performed to satisfaction. What remains is the echo." "The echo being what?" I asked, though I already had an idea. "The moral," he said, "and those who will refuse to learn it." It was the kind of morning that promised trouble dressed as closure. Fritz had set the breakfast tray, with eggs and peach preserves, and Wolfe was giving them the attention he denied most people. I was on my second cup of coffee when the phone rang. I answered. "Archie Goodwin." It was Saul Panzer, voice steady but low. "Something you'll want to know. Conte's dead." The fork froze halfway to Wolfe's mouth. "Where?" I asked. "In his car near the river. Looks like an accident. Carbon monoxide. But it's neat, sir. Too neat." I thanked him, hung up and turned. Wolfe's eyes had narrowed to slits. "When?" "Early morning, Saul says. He was found an hour ago." He set down his fork with surgical precision. "A man who defies a priest and survives the night rarely greets the dawn unchallenged." "Vieri?" "Possibly," Wolfe said. "Or possibly someone tidying the lesson before it could be misunderstood." I waited because when Wolfe thinks, interrupting him is like sneezing in a cathedral. He leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. No bottle could kill, but a reputation might. Someone intends to conclude this play by removing all who know the script. "Then we've got at least 2 acts left," I said. "What do you want me to do?" "Find Miss Vance. See if she has received condolences, or threats. Leora Vance lived above her distillery, in a converted loft that smelled faintly of oak and rebellion. She opened the door before I knocked twice, hair undone, eyes red, but not from tears. "I heard," she said before I could start. "Conte. They called me at 6. You too close?" She shook her head. "Not like that, but he was decent. He kept his word, which is rarer than money." She turned and walked back into the room, gesturing for me to follow. The place was a mix of copper stills and rough wood furniture, the kind of aesthetic that tells visitors to sit down only if they're honest. "Who called you?" I asked. "Father Vieri," she said flatly. "He offered prayers, then said Conte's soul had found peace." That sounds rehearsed. It sounded planned. I let that settle. On her work table sat a sealed envelope addressed in a heavy hand. She noticed me noticing. It came an hour after the call. Messenger dropped it off. No return name. "May I?" She nodded. Inside was a single line typed on an old ribbon machine. "The whiskey belongs to silence." No signature. "Did you show this to anyone?" "Only you," she said. "And if you're here, that means Wolfe's already thinking 3 steps ahead." "Always," I said. "He's probably halfway through the 4th by now." By the time I got back to the brownstone, Wolfe had shifted into what I call his pre-eruption calm. Too still, too quiet. Like the eye of a storm with impeccable vocabulary. He didn't look up when I entered. "The message?" he asked. I handed it over. He read it once, twice, then slid it beside the newspaper obituary. "So the author wishes to end. Conversation. How consistent. Whoever killed Conte wants the secret to remain a legend, not a fact." "Which secret? That the bottle never really belonged to any of them?" "Perhaps. Or that Belandi's moral theater has now become literal bloodshed." The doorbell rang, sharp enough to make Fritz appear before the echo faded. He returned with Father Vieri. The priest looked leaner, colder, and more human than he had under the church lights. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "I did not come to quarrel. I came to confess." Wolfe's brows rose the width of a syllable. "This is not a confessional." "Then let it be a witness," Vieri said. "Mr. Conte was found dead. I spoke with him yesterday after the wake. He was angry, but alive. He said he would go to the press, tell them the auction was a fraud, the whiskey false. I told him not to. I told him it would damn Salvatore's name. He left. I did not see him again." "That is not a confession," Wolfe said. "That is biography." Vieri's eyes burned. "You think I killed him?" "I think you encouraged his disappearance," Wolfe said. "A man does not die of carbon monoxide after a sermon unless someone provides the scripture." The priest leaned forward. "If you believe that, call the police." Wolfe didn't move. "The police will look for evidence of crime. I look for evidence of will." There was silence. Then Vieri said softly, "He wanted redemption. Maybe he found it." He stood, turned and left before I could open the door for him. I waited. Wolfe stayed silent long enough for Fritz to deliver beer. Then finally, he spoke. "Archie, you will go tonight to Belandi's apartment once more. His nurse will have left by 10. In his room is a cabinet with a false bottom beneath the ledger drawer. Retrieve what you find there and bring it to me." "What am I finding?" "The conclusion," Wolfe said. "I believe Belandi wrote his final note not for God, nor for those fools of virtue, but for himself. And that note will name his heir, not to whiskey, but to guilt." I went. The building on Riverside was half asleep when I arrived. Paolo, the nurse, was indeed gone. The apartment was dim and quiet, the scent of whiskey long absorbed by dust. In the bedroom, Belandi lay still, truly still now, his chest unmoving, his smile unchanged. He'd died sometime between last night's sermon and this morning's headline. I found the cabinet, lifted the false bottom, and there it was. a sealed letter addressed to whoever drinks last. I slipped it inside my coat and left, feeling the kind of chill that doesn't come from the air. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe opened the envelope with the care of a surgeon unwrapping dynamite. Inside were 3 pages of Belandi's handwriting, shaky but deliberate. I read over his shoulder. The whiskey was never meant to be consumed. It is what binds the greedy to their reflection. Whoever covets it will find himself alone with it, and then himself alone, period. Wolfe folded the pages slowly. He wrote his epitaph in ink and action, he said, and they are fulfilling it with obedient precision. I said, so it's over. He looked at me, eyes darker than the beer in his glass. No, Archie. It has only reached the part where the living start to believe the dead. Outside, thunder cracked low over the city. Inside, Wolfe leaned back, his voice calm as an epitaph. Belandi's final whiskey has done what no spirit before it managed, he said. It distilled conscience,